Welcome to another episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your creeper host, Dom, and in this episode we take a look at the sequel to the horror anthology classic from director Michael Gornick, the 1987 horror comedy anthology film Creepshow II. Michael Gornick, who was previously the cinematographer of the first film, takes over directing duties from George A. Romero, and Romero takes over screenwriting duties from Stephen King. The film is once again based on stories by Stephen King and features 3 more horror segments consisting of Old Chief Woodenhead, The Raft, and The Hitchhiker. So grab you the latest issue and let's get into Creepshow II. After the success of the first Creepshow was a box office success, so naturally, Creepshow II was commissioned. This time, Romero handed over the director's chair to frequent cinematographer Michael Gornick and wrote the script himself, based on stories and a treatment written by King. It's not surprising that Creepshow II wasn't as good without the two masters in their prior roles, but for years the sequel had an unjust reputation of being outright terrible. Creepshow 2's failure to duplicate the original's financial returns didn't help matters. It was originally thought that the sequel would receive a budget in line with the first film, which had cost $8 million. During pre-production, though, production company Laurel Entertainment drastically cut Creepshow 2's budget to less than half of that. This budget shortfall is readily apparent when watching the sequel, and it looks noticeably cheaper overall. So with that, how about we just get into Creepshow 2?
5 years ago, Stephen King and George Romero, two masters of the macabre, created their hallmark of horror, Creepshow. Many would argue that nothing of significance has happened since. Until now. Maybe you don't get out much.
Oh, this is crazy. This is totally crazy.
Maybe you're always running late.
I gotta go.
Or maybe you just have other things on your mind.
They gotta make me a movie star.
But if you only make it to one scary film all year, make it one you'll remember all year long. Creepshow II. If you like movies that will keep you stuck to your chair. Stephen King and George Romero have conjured up an all-new Creepshow.
No! That's impossible!
Just for you.
I mean, what is it?
I don't know.
So don't just sit there.
And I'm gonna swim for it right now.
Walk. Run. Swim if you have to.
I got you!
But whatever you do, don't take your time. Because the scares come twice as quickly in
I beat you.
Creepshow 2.
This time we start off with a prologue. So in the quiet town of Dexter, Maine, a delivery truck pulls up to a newsstand. Billy, the young boy, eagerly follows the truck on his bike. The truck's back shutter opens to reveal the creep, who drops off copies of the latest issue of Creepshow. And it has the same cover as the comic of the final scene from the previous film, before vanishing. Billy picks up an issue and begins to read it. The first story is called Old Chief Woodenhead. Ray and Martha Spruce are an elderly couple who run a small-town general store. Their decor includes a cigar store Indian named Old Chief Woodenhead. The Spruces are visited by Benjamin Whitemoon, the elder of a local Native American tribe, who gives them a bag of turquoise jewelry, the tribe's sacred treasures, as collateral for the debt the tribe has incurred. Later that night, the Spruces are robbed by Benjamin's estranged ne'er-do-well nephew, Sam Whitemoon. Armed with a shotgun and his two friends, Andy Kavanagh and Vince Gribbins, they struggle, and Sam's gun goes off and fires at Martha, killing her. Sam shoots and kills Ray as well before grabbing the jewels and driving away with the others. After they leave, old Chief Woodenhead comes to life and goes after the thugs. He shoots Vince with multiple arrows, slaughters Andy with a tomahawk, and uses a hunting knife to scalp Sam. The next morning, Benjamin wakes up to find the turquoise jewelry on his bed. He visits the ruined store to find old Chief Woodenhead back on the porch, holding Sam's bloody scalp and a bloodstained knife. And now we cut to the interlude, which is a continuation of the prologue, and everything is still animated, which we had seen the prologue transition into. At the town post office, Billy receives a package from the clerk that supposedly contains a product advertised in his comic, the bulb for a man-eating Venus flytrap. Billy pays for the package and sets off for home. The creep appears behind from the post office counter and begins our next tale, The Raft. In mid-October, 4 college students, Deke, Laverne, Randy, and Rachel, arrive at Cascade Beach, a desolate lake far from civilization, for some fun. While swimming to a wooden raft in the middle of the lake, Randy witnesses a duck being pulled under the water by an unseen force. Once all 4 students are on the raft, they discover what Randy was so nervous about: a large, black, blob-like creature resembling an oil slick floating on the surface of the water. As Rachel leans over the raft and tries and touch the creature, it grabs a hold of Rachel, pulls her into the lake, and digests her. The 3 panicking students remember that it's currently the off-season, meaning that there is no caretaker to rescue them anytime soon. As time passes, Deke plans to swim to shore so he can bring back help. Before he can make a break for it, however, the blob seeps through the raft's cracks, grabs Deke by the foot, and pulls him through the raft, killing him. Noting that the creature is still hungry, Randy and Laverne manage to evade the creature as it tries to grab them from under the raft. When night falls, Randy and Laverne take turns watching for the creature, then eventually fall asleep on each other's arms. The next morning, Randy discovers that he and Laverne are still alive. Neglecting to keep an eye on the creature, Randy lays Laverne on the raft and begins kissing and caressing her sleeping body. Laverne then awakens screaming in agony, revealing that the creature had seeped through the cracks and has covered half of her face, much to Randy's horror. As the blob pulls her off the raft and begins consuming her, Randy jumps off the raft to swim to shore. He barely makes it and shouts, "I beat you!" However, the creature rears up from the water like a wave and engulfs Randy. The blob returns to the lake, leaving no evidence of the students other than their discarded clothes and still running car. Unknown to the students, there was a sign barely visible behind some thick vegetation that reads, "No swimming." And now we transition to Interlude 2. On his way back home from the post office, Billy is ambushed by a gang of neighborhood bullies. The gang's leader, named Rhino, takes Billy's package, finds the Venus flytrap bulb, and crushes it with his foot. In retaliation, Billy kicks Rhino in the groin and flees as the bullies race after him. As Billy escapes, the creep appears from behind a tree and goes on to tell the last story, The Hitchhiker. Annie Lansing, an adulterous Maine businesswoman, wakes up and gets out of bed after sleeping with her gigolo lover. Annie realizes that she only has 15 minutes before her attorney husband George arrives home, so she hops into her car and races for home several miles away. A spilled ember from her cigarette causes Annie to lose control at a slippery corner where she runs down a Dover-bound hitchhiker. Seeing that no one witnessed the incident, Annie takes off and doesn't look back. Shortly after she leaves, however, the area is crowded with a truck driver, a pair of passerbys, and George, who reports the hit and run to the police. Miles away, Annie thinks about what she has done and briefly considers turning around and turning herself in, but ultimately concludes that no one has anything on her and thinks that everything will be fine. Before she can continue, however, the hitchhiker suddenly appears outside her window and utters, "Thanks for the ride, lady," a line he repeats throughout the story. Annie speeds off in terror, but the hitchhiker reaches through the sunroof and grabs her. She drives off the road and through the woods where she's knocked the hitchhiker off the roof with a low-hanging branch. The hitchhiker appears again, opening the door to the passenger seat. Annie shoots him with the revolver multiple times, but fails to kill him. She manages to kick him out of the car and run him over repeatedly. The hitchhiker then climbs out onto the hood and pulls up his Dover sign, which now reads, "You killed me." Annie again loses control of her car and drives off the road, down a hill and into a tree. Annie repeatedly slams the hitchhiker into the same tree, knocking herself out in the process. A while later, Annie awakens from her accident, not seeing the hitchhiker anywhere. Annie believes that the experience was all a nightmare, so she gets back into the road and drives home, actually getting there before George. As she begins to step out of the car, the hitchhiker, gruesomely mangled and still uttering, "Thanks for the ride, lady," crawls out from under the car and attacks her. The garage door swings shut as the interior begins to fill with smoke. Sometime later, George finally arrives at home to find Annie in her still-running car, dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. The hitchhiker's bloody Dover sign sits in her lap. And now we end on the epilogue. Inside the delivery truck, the creep prepares to drive away and bids the audience farewell. But then he spots Billy, still being chased by the bullies. Billy leads his pursuers into a vacant lot swarming with out-of-control plant growth. The bulb rhino smash was not the first one Billy had ordered. A quintet of giant Venus flytraps emerge from the surrounding weeds and devour all the thugs. The creep cackles in glee and drives off to deliver the latest issue of Creepshow to another town. Then, in a post-credit scene, the following text appears. Juvenile delinquency is a product of pent-up frustration, stored up resentments, and bottled-up fears. It is not the product of cartoons and captions. But the comics are a handy, obvious, uncomplicated scapegoat. If the adults who crusade against them would only get as steamed up over such basic causes as of delinquency as parental ignorance, indifference, and cruelty, they might discover that comic books are no more a menace than Treasure Island or Jack the Giant Killer. Alright, so how about we jump into some trivia? So Daniel Beer, who played Randy in the segment The Raft, almost died from hypothermia. The water was so cold, his body turned green. The crew wanted him to continue acting, but director Michael Gornick said that if they get him to keep working, he will walk off the set and never return. So they took him to the hospital and he made a full recovery and completed the segment of The Raft. That's kind of messed up because, like, why would you intentionally let your actor or your performer, even somebody in your crew, like, put themselves through something like that where, like, they literally could just die? Like, and why would you even, like, I'm glad that the director did this. I'm glad he, like, stepped in and said, no, we're taking him to the hospital. He's got to get better. And I get that the crew just wants to get things done. You know, they got to keep things moving, but there's a difference between getting things done and letting someone intentionally, like, get harmed or possibly die. So he did a good thing in that. So David Holbrook appears in the segment Old Chief Woodenhead. It's just kind of funny because his father, Hal Holbrook, starred in Creepshow in the segment The Crate. That's right. Hal Holbrook and David Holbrook, shockingly, are related. And I think that's kind of, I like that when, like, someone will be in something and then, like, their kid comes along and does something else, maybe in the same series, maybe related to them, maybe not related to them. One thing I like it's also like the reverse, like when Janet Leigh appeared in Halloween H2O with Jamie Lee Curtis. It works on so many different levels. I mean, just because they're daughter and mother, but also because Psycho is a huge influence on Halloween, so it comes back to that. And then you also get the reference to the car in that film for Janet Leigh from Psycho. So it's just a whole bunch of meta-ness, and I love that. I love things like that, where like, oh yeah, his son was actually in this, and it makes the connections like that much better. It's like with the first one where Stephen King was in it, and his son played the kid in the wraparound story. So it all works out really well. I love it. It just works so good. Although the film consists of only 3 short horror stories and the wraparound animation story, there were, just like the first film, originally 5 stories written. One of these, The Cat from Hell, was later used in the similar anthology film, which became Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. The other story was originally intended to be in the film, was Stephen King's short story Pinfall, about a ghostly rival bowling team, and it kind of sounds something like something that tied you over a little bit ish, where like one team murders the other team, and then they're playing like a league of bowling. They're in a bowling league, and then that rival team shows up as zombies. Ooh, that's kind of what it was. And I'm kind of glad that they kind of got rid of that one. The Cat from Hell is a little ridiculous, but I think really would have fit well in Creepshow II. It does. I don't feel like it fits at all in Tales from the Dark Side of the movie. I think honestly, this may be a opinion that most people might not like, but that movie's not that great. I think the only story that works in there is the one with the gargoyle, or whatever the thing is that appears to the artist and like gives him inspiration or whatever, and then whatever turns out like his wife was the gargoyle, something like that. I don't know, whatever. But I really wish they would have included maybe like The Cat from Hell, or just another story, maybe another 2. I think, but I do know that the budget was cut severely, and that's also why they had to do like the wraparound as an animation. So I get it, but I just wish this just had a little bit more to it. Makeup artist Ed French left the film amidst filming The Raft after being snubbed by director Michael Gornick, who turned to Howard Berger for advice on how to fix the blob monster in the lake instead of French. Berger and Greg Nicotero finished the remaining effects in the film without French. And it kind of sucks. I mean, you were hired to do a specific job, and I mean, yeah, you're the makeup artist, and maybe this was like an effects, have like the thing for the blob in the lake. And honestly, that doesn't sound like to me like you would go to a makeup artist for, unless they kind of were part of the same like department and like he headed that. I don't know, but it just sounds like to me like he wanted someone to come to him for all the like on how to like fix these things, and they didn't. And then just keeping in line with that, let's move on to the next part. Makeup artist Ed French was originally supposed to play the role of the creep, but when he left the project, Tom Savini stepped in to play the small role with the prosthetics on and everything, and I think he does a pretty good job. It would have been a little different if it was Ed French. I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything, if he's ever acted in anything, but I think Tom Savini is pretty good in this like little role because he is sometimes an actor, so he at least understands like how to play a role, even if it is just something small for this. But I mean, that's the like one thing from this that I really remember standing out is like the creep. At least I'll get to it in my final thoughts, but you know, he just, like I said, yeah, he really stands out with all this prosthetic on as like a major part of the film. But now let's move on to the part of the podcast where we tally up the deaths. Kill counter. Creepshow 2 may be shorter than the first one, but it has 2 more deaths at 14. So let's go through segment by segment and see all the kills. In the first segment, Old Chief Woodenhead, that has 5 deaths. Starting off, we see Martha Spruce shot in the side and Ray Spruce shot by Sam Whitemoon with a shotgun. That's when they go in and they try and steal the jewels from them, and like they accidentally, at first it's an accident, but then he intentionally kills Ray and then just straight up robs him. So then the next death we see is from Old Chief Woodenhead himself. He kills Fat Stuff Gribbons by impaling him with an arrow. Then Andy Kavanagh by partially decapitating him with the hatchet. And then finally Sam Whitemoon is killed by scalping. And they all get what they deserve. I just remember, like, the effect, the visual effects on Old Chief Woodenhead are pretty good. The second segment, the Raft, has 4 deaths. All of the teenagers, Rachel, Deke, Laverne, and Randy, they're all mounted by the Raft creature. And yeah, maybe that might be a quick run through, but just like what it does to them, it just sounds excruciating. I mean, it's digesting them. It's like one big like blob of acid just dissolving them away, and it's just that one always stuck out to me. But like I said, final thoughts, we'll talk about it. Last segment, the Hitchhiker has 2 deaths. The titular Hitchhiker gets run over by Annie Lansing. Annie Lansing is strangled by the zombie hitchhiker who's been following her since she killed him, and he makes it look kind of like a suicide, but then like he leaves the sign too. So it's like this, like, how are you gonna explain that to anybody, right? Finally, we have the wraparound story. Those 3 bullies, one of them named Rhino, they're all eaten by giant mutant plants, and they get what they deserve. And that's the 14 deaths. I mean, that's what you kind of want in a horror sequel, is a little bit more deaths, right? You don't want it to go down, unless you do want it to go down. I don't know why, right? You want more deaths, more horrors, more scares, right? So I'm glad that like they tried to do a little bit more with the less, because as I stated before, they didn't have too much of a budget. So I'm glad though that they knew what to do with what they had. So let's just move on straight into my final thoughts on the film. I remember renting this film as a kid and only really liking the second segment, the Raft. Honestly, for a long time, I forgot the third segment, just because it didn't really stand out to me. I went back to it in more recent years and had a better appreciation for the first segment, but I still feel a little let down. I'm not a big fan of the animated wraparound story, nor am I a huge fan of the last segment. I do understand, though, why they went with the animation. That was more as a cost-saving measure, because their budget was halved from what the first one was, which you would think that for a film that did so well, they would have given you a little bit more, but that's besides the point. But it's not terrible for what they had, is what I'm trying to say. But the last segment just still does feel underwhelming. It is very Stephen King-ish in a way. I understand where he was where the idea comes from, but I don't think George A. Romero implemented it that well. I love the Raft. That to me has always been scary, that isolated and trapped feeling, and it is exactly how you craft suspense in a story. And you're just sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to see if they can get out of the situation, and they, one by one, they're picked off by this thing that is very, to me, this is more Stephen King-ish in the idea that there's just a simple setup of some kids going to go swim in the lake or whatever. They swim out to the raft that's in the middle of the lake, and then they see this very Lovecraftian thing, something that's unexplainable. They don't understand why it's there. They don't know how it got there. Has it been there for forever? Is it something new? Is it because of something? Is it Was it designed? Was it created? Was it just something that sprung up? Right? It's like it's so. To me, that's more scary than anything else. It's just like this thing that can just be floating there, kind of like a jellyfish. I guess is more like what I'm thinking of. Like, it's this thing that you don't know how it got there, and you think it can't hurt you, but unfortunately, it's one animal that can hurt you very much. If you're like, it can sting, it can poison. It's a very weird thing, right? Because you just still can't, like, your mind just can't wrap itself around this thing that's just floating in the ocean. In the first segment, Old Chief Woodenhead is a little silly, but quintessential Creepshow. Like, there's a difference between being like Stephen Kingish, and that's where I would put like, the Lonesome Death of Jody Verrill, or I'd put like The Crate, or I'd put like The Raft. But things that are more like, and yeah, those go to like everything that is very quintessential Creepshow as well. But what I mean by like this being a little bit different is it's more like the Father's Day segment, or like something to tide you over, or they're creeping up on you, right? It's like this kind of quantitative thing that you can't really put your finger on, but there's just something about it that it's just like, yeah, that belongs in Creepshow. Like, it's not something that's like fully meant to be super scary. It's meant to be a little bit more campy, I guess. Especially with how like the prosthetics look, but like it goes towards the story. Like, it makes you believe the story a little bit more, I think, because yeah, it's a little fakeish looking, but like, come on, that's kind of how all like that's how you imagine something from a comic book to come to life, especially from these horror comic books. And I always remember that story as well, particularly the ending where the guy gets scalped at the end. And you know, my friend, he's Native American, so to me, like, that story works very well because I understand like the people who live there and like the way that they deal with things. And to me, it works a little bit better than I think it should. And like I said, it's campy, it's a little over the top, it's ridiculous, but that's also what Creepshow's about. Like, it can be scary and creepy and silly, but it can also be campy and a little bit ridiculous sometimes. I just am so on the redesign of the Creeper also. Like, I love that Tom Savini is wearing this prosthetic and performing the part, because I've seen him in other things. Like, he did really well in From Dusk Till Dawn. There's a character he plays there that's hilarious and very memorable. And making him like more human, I think, works here, but I still just love that original design of like the skeletal figure that's on the cover and the poster for both films. That's why I always thought it was weird, like, why does he look so different in the film than from the way he looks on the cover? Like, it's so weird that they changed it like this. But I'm glad for, and this is the first time I bring it up, but there is a TV series for Creepshow that's on Shudder, and we're going to get to that in the next review. I don't know if it'll be the next one exactly, but it'll be coming up soon. But I'm glad that they did change him back to like his skeletal form. I even have a pop figure of him that's glow in the dark, and I love that they kind of went back to that, because I think it works better for the comics, well, the quote unquote comics in the universe of Creepshow. And I think it just works overall. So, to kind of close everything out, there's a really terrifying segment with the Raft, a campy segment with Old Chief Woodenhead, and then a just okay segment with the Hitchhiker. For a sequel, it didn't quite live up to the first one, and that's always disappointing. And this is one of those cases where it's like, man, you just wanted them to give you a little bit more. Too, the fact that there's only 3 and then the wraparound kind of sucks. It makes it feel like, you're not getting all, like, if at least they were like a little bit longer and a little bit more in depth. Like VHS 2 does that really well, where they cut the number down by one, but they give you one longer segment that really outshines everything else. But then, like, the third one kind of does that too, where it, like, and honestly, that's probably why the third one is not my favorite of VHS Viral, or VHS Viral is not one of my favorites, because they not only cut down again, but then, like, they're not like much longer. They try and include more stuff in the wraparound, and they try and make it this and all this other stuff, and it's weird. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I like things that are weird and don't make a lot of sense. But anyways, getting back to this, I really wish that we'd gotten a little bit more, maybe just a segment more. I think that's all it's missing. It just needs something else. It kind of seems like it's like, oh, like, look at this trilogy, but they are just kind of like stories that don't. I get that, like, they, of course, they don't connect, and they don't. But they, at least with Creepshow, it kind of seemed a little structured to be like, here's one that's kind of ridiculous, but still makes a little bit of sense in the realm of the world. Here's one that's over the top and silly. Here's one that's the idea is ridiculous, but it's taken more seriously. Here's one that's very serious and very scary. And then another one that's just supposed to be like, ew, gross out, but like chilling at the same time. This one is just kind of like, okay, he's coming to life and he killed that guy. Cool. What is that thing? Oh my god, it's terrifying that it's just eating these kids. Oh, it's a hitchhiker, and he's just relentlessly coming back and saying, thanks for the ride, lady. And yeah, I get that, like, he's like decaying more and more, but I don't know. This film, to me, did feel like a letdown. I don't review very many films that I don't particularly like, and I like it to a certain degree. I just don't want to go out of my way to review something that I don't like. What am I going to do? Sit here and like hate on it all day? But there are some redeeming things about it. But unfortunately, it's just I don't think that it just lived up to what the first one did, and even with the TV, because the TV show, they took the ideas from these two, and they ran with it really well in the TV show, and I can't wait to get to that. But because there's some pretty good, pretty scary things in the TV show. I'm telling you right now. There's an episode that I think is very scary because it's just set up so well. But for this being the sequel to Creepshow, I'm just gonna give it like a thumb and a half up, because it's like, I say if you really like Creepshow and you're immersed in this Creepshow world, watch it. Especially if you you're like, oh, like, I want to go back and understand where the show came from. Then watch at least the first one. Then if you're really interested, watch this one. But I wouldn't go out of my way to watch this one again. And really quick, I'm just going to end off with, I'm not going to review Creepshow 3, because that movie is by someone entirely different, produced by someone who just happened to get the rights. I've watched reviews of it. I haven't seen it myself. It looks ridiculous. It looks like it's very low budget. I just don't even want to talk about it. It's not even. I feel like everyone who's involved with it, with Creepshow nowadays, would be like, we don't count it at all. We don't even talk about that movie. But Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, I would still consider that like the third film to the series, but I'm not going to review that as part of this, because it is its own separate movie. It spun off its own separate universe and TV show. So that's pretty much where we're going to end for now. Were you creeped out by this movie? Did it live up to the original? Which story was your favorite? Let us know on all of your socials, or, you can let us know on our socials. Thank you all for listening, and if you like what you hear, Please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any strange, mysterious, or unexplained stories? Are they fact? Did you craft a story yourself? If you would like us to read your stories, you can email them to us at horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to read them on the podcast. We'd also like to post those stories to our social on Instagram, Threads, or TikTok, all at Horrorbox Podcast. That's where we also have updates and news. One last thing. If you like the podcast and would like to support the podcast, buy me a coffee. You can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/horrorboxpodcast. It would really help out. We'll see you next time and hear what comes out from the horror box.